which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Erin, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the April 26, 2026 issue of the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. My first article is Health Law Gets Doctors Cash In. Patient Safeguard Has Unintended Effect by Sarah Cliff and Margot Sanger-Katz. Dr. Norman Rowe, a plastic surgeon with offices in New York and Florida, advertises on his website that breast reduction surgery usually costs between $15,000 and $25,000. But these days, his practice sometimes earns $440,000 for the procedure. Dr. Rowe has taken full advantage of a new arbitration system, part of a major consumer protection law Congress passed in 2020 with bipartisan majorities. The No Surprises Act was designed to eliminate surprise medical bills for patients who showed up in the emergency room and were treated by a doctor who didn't take their insurance. It bars those out-of-network doctors from billing patients directly. Instead, they can plead their case to a government-approved arbitrator. If they win, the patient's insurer has to pay their desired amount. By all accounts, the law is successfully protecting patients against bills from doctors they never chose. But it has also generated an expensive, unanticipated consequence. Doctors have flooded the arbitration system with millions of claims. Most are winning, often collecting fees hundreds of times higher than what they could negotiate with insurers directly or what they could have earned from patients before the law passed. I'm still glad we passed the bill because we got consumers out of it, but we need to rein in this arbitration process, says Representative Frank Pallone Jr., Democrat of New Jersey, who helped negotiate the law. Some health plans said they have increased premiums this year to cover the extra costs. The United Service Workers Health Plan, which covers 20,000 trade workers in the New York area, said that it boosted premiums by an extra 1.75 percentage points to offset arbitration awards and fees. The system has also enriched a new class of specialized businesses, which assists doctors in navigating the bureaucratic process. This is a recipe for driving up healthcare costs, says Karen Ignani, the executive chair of Emblem Health, which sued Dr. Rowe in March, arguing his use of arbitration amounted to fraud. There are no checks, there are no balances, there's no oversight. When the law passed, government officials estimated that about 17,000 cases would go to arbitration a year. Instead, doctors brought 1.2 million such cases in the first half of last year and won around 88% of them. The arbitrators are doing well, too. The fees they earn for deciding cases, which range from $425 to $1,150 per case, have added up. They earned $885 million from 2022 to 2024. In arbitration, doctors and insurers each propose a price for care, along with arguments for why it is appropriate. An arbitrator must pick one of the two numbers, and there is no opportunity to appeal the decision. Arbitrators have repeatedly approved doctors' submissions of extremely high prices for common medical procedures, according to court filings and a New York Times analysis of a large public data set with basic information on each dispute. A neurosurgery practice outside of Philadelphia went to arbitration after the health plan Highmark offered its standard payment of $2,660 for a diagnostic procedure to measure blood flow to the brain. An arbitrator awarded it $333,000 instead. A New Jersey anesthesiologist was awarded $14,560 in 2025 for an X-ray guided steroid injection. Many claims it shouldn't be eligible for arbitration, such as those for patients covered through the government programs like Medicare and Medicaid, move through the system anyway. The claim from the New Jersey anesthesiologist involved a patient on a United Healthcare Medicare Advantage plan according to a lawsuit the United Health has filed protesting the arbitration decision. The doctor's billing company recognized the submission was a mistake and tried to withdraw it before the decision. But his lawyer, Eric Katz, said that the arbitrator clearly thought the award was appropriate. No one put a gun to anyone's head, he said. If the plans have issues with the way this is being handled, take it up with Congress. Medical specialties like spinal and plastic surgery, for which surprise bills were rare before the law, now frequently have cases in arbitration according to the public data. Some practices are using the law to obtain high payments for routine medical care, including gynecologists who have won fees 600 times higher than usual rates for placing intrauterine contraceptive devices, or IUDs. The money does not always end up with doctors, but instead can go to the owners of their practices. The Times interviewed 2 physicians who show up repeatedly on public data files. Both said they were salaried workers and uninvolved in the claims filed under their names. The government has hired 15 firms, some boutique vendors, and other large contractors to arbitrate billing disputes. Doctors and insurers can select a firm if they agree or be randomly assigned one if they do not. Health policy experts have been surprised to see such lopsided results that favor doctors. Some argue that because the arbitrators are paid per case, they may have an incentive to render decisions that keep doctors coming back. Arbitrators may also, like the broader public, prefer doctors to insurers, say Matthew Fielder, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution who has studied the law. Arbitrators are people, and the typical person likes physicians. David Farber, a lawyer for the newly formed Coalition of Independent Dispute Resolution Entities, a trade group representing some of the arbitration firms, disputed the notion that arbitrators acted improperly. We're getting the job done, he said, and the job is getting done consistent with how Congress set the process up to work. Doctors contend that they only pursue arbitration when insurers offer unreasonably low payments. We have very strong preference to be in-network at sustainable rates, says Dr. Richard Heller, a senior vice president at Radiology Partners, which employs over 4,000 radiologists. This company now has 150 staff members working to bring arbitration claims. Dr. Rowe has practiced for decades on New York City's Park Avenue and in New Jersey. Last winter, he opened an office in Palm Beach, Florida, a few miles from President Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. Just before the inauguration, he told the New York Post the office had been overrun with clients who wanted to look good when they have FaceTime with the leader of the free world. Dr. Rowe did not respond to multiple requests for comment from the Times. A lavish lifestyle. On social media, he flaunts a lavish lifestyle. An Instagram post in February detailing his 60th birthday party featured a performance from the rapper 50 Cent and a custom cake recreation of his 1950s vintage Porsche. Health insurers do not cover many of the elective procedures that Dr. Rowe provides, such as penis enlargement. That service became a big enough part of his practice that he has trademarked the nicknames Dr. Penis. Breast reductions, however, are different. They are often treated as medically necessary because they can reduce back and neck pain. Before the No Surprises Act, Dr. Rowe's practice was out of network with Emblem Health, but he accepted fees $30,000 or lower for hundreds of breast reduction surgeries, the lawsuit claims. In 2024, the lawsuit says he started routinely performing surgeries on Emblem Health patients and hospitals that accepted the insurer's in-network payments, though he still did not. Under the No Surprises Act, doctors in such situations can provide patients with a waiver that warns of additional costs. If patients sign the form, the doctor has permission to bill them directly. Dr. Rowe does not hand out that waiver. That allows him to take his payment disputes to arbitration. He and his practice have filed more than 6,000 arbitration claims, according to an analysis of public filings from the Georgetown University Center on Health Insurance Reforms. He has won more than 85% of his cases. The lawsuit offers details about 5 of those cases, all for elective breast reduction surgeries. In the first case in November 2024, Dr. Rowe won a payment of $112,500 that covered his work and the work of an assistant surgeon. In the 5th one, in late December 2025, His practice brought and won separate claims for each surgeon, totaling $440,000. Altogether, the practice won more than $1.4 million from those 5 surgeries alone. Emblem Health's strategy also changed over time. According to the suit, the company started with a low counteroffer around $6,000. Over time, it tried offering fees as high as $124,000, but continued to lose. The plan's lawyers also started including language in their briefs stating that Dr. Rowe has a pattern of exploiting the process. Dr. Rowe's briefs to the arbitrator are not public, so it is unclear exactly what arguments he made to justify the much higher rates he was claiming in arbitration. The law directs arbitrators to consider several factors, including the usual price insurers pay, the doctor's experience, and the patient's complexity. Escalated earnings? Elevance Health, another insurer, said that breast reduction surgeries are now its most expensive category of arbitration claims. Ariel Biowitz, the company's vice president of health economics, said one Connecticut plastic surgery practice has escalated its earnings from the procedure, beginning at $70,000 in 2024 and hitting $440,000 late last year. Michael Gottlieb, the lawyer who handles Dr. Rowe's arbitrator filings, declined to speak about continuing litigation, but did broadly defend his clients seeking much higher amounts than insurers typically pay. He described the arbitrators as having reverse sticker shock at how low the health plan payments were. When they got wind of 3-digit payments for massive complex surgeries, and they know they pay their plumber more to fix a toilet, they just gravitate toward the provider's offers, even if they do seem eyebrow-raisingly high, he said. Arbitration decisions are supposed to be binding, but Mr. Gottlieb said the health plans often refuse to send payment. He has sued multiple insurers over this issue. In March, one doctor he represents received a letter from the Motion Picture Industry Health Plan, which provides coverage to many film workers. The letter, which the Times reviewed, stated that the plan would not pay the amount an arbitrator selected because it does not constitute appropriate use of plan assets. 4 years before the No Surprises Act passed, surprise billing was an urgent topic in Congress. Lawmakers from both parties denounced the high bills that ambushed patients. But these days in Washington, the law's unexpected results are rarely discussed. Instead, many legislators who worked on the law emphasized the success of consumer protections. My focus is on ensuring everyone can get the care they need without worrying about the cost, said Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington, who helped craft the bill. Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana, and a physician who helped write the law, said the large awards were a sign that insurers were not making reasonable offers. If they're winning, it's because the insurance companies are not coming back with the reasonable thing, he said. In late 2023, the Biden administration proposed changes to the arbitration system, including more scrutiny of ineligible claims. The Trump administration has not yet put into place those reforms. Only one bill has been introduced in Congress to change arbitration, and it would increase penalties on insurers that fail to pay doctors quickly after cases are concluded. Seeing little movement in Washington, health plans have turned to the courts. They have filed at least 20 lawsuits against doctors and the companies they use to submit claims. But this month, judges in California and Florida dismissed 2 such cases, finding that Congress did not intend for judges to review the arbitration awards. If an insurer believes doctors are acting improperly, the Florida judge wrote, it should raise the issue in arbitration. My next article is Rubio's absence from Iran talks highlights his stay-at-home role, by Michael Crowley. When President Barack Obama negotiated a nuclear deal with Iran more than a decade ago, his point man was Secretary of State John Kerry. Over 20 months of talks, Mr. Kerry met with his Iranian counterpart on at least 18 different days, often several times per day. High-level nuclear diplomacy was a natural role for the top U.S. diplomat. Secretaries of State traditionally take the lead on the country's biggest diplomatic tasks, from arms control treaties to Israeli-Palestinian agreements. But as President Trump prepared to send a delegation to the latest round of the U.S.-Iran talks in Pakistan over the weekend, his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was set to remain where he often does, at home. Mr. Rubio did not attend the last U.S. meeting with Iran earlier this month. nor did he join several meetings held over the past year in Geneva and Doha, Qatar. Mr. Rubio has also been absent from U.S. delegations abroad, working to settle the war in Ukraine and Israel's war in Gaza. Despite a long period of crisis and war in the region, he has not visited the Middle East since a brief stop in Israel last October. In recent months, Mr. Rubio, consumed with his second role as Mr. Trump's national security advisor, has not traveled much at all. During the Biden administration, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken made 11 foreign trips from January 2024 to late April 2024, stopping in roughly 36 cities, according to the State Department. So far this year, Mr. Rubio has visited 6 foreign cities, including a stop in Milan for the 2026 Winter Olympics. Mr. Trump has outsourced much of his diplomacy to others, including his friend Steve Witkoff, a wealthy associate from the world of Manhattan real estate, and his son-in-law Jared Kushner. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner have spearheaded diplomacy with Israel, Ukraine, and Russia, as well as Iran. They plan to travel to Islamabad, Pakistan this weekend for the second time to try to renew negotiations to end the war. Mr. Rubio's distance from the trenches of diplomacy reflects his dual role on Mr. Trump's national security team. For the past year, he has served as the White House National Security Advisor, even while leading at the State Department, the first person to do so since Henry Kissinger in the mid-1970s. Secretary of State runs the State Department, overseeing U.S. diplomats and embassies worldwide, as well as Washington-based policymakers. Working from the White House, the National Security Advisor coordinates departments and agencies, including the State Department, to develop policy advice for the president. The twin roles reflect Mr. Rubio's influence with Mr. Trump and offer him a way to maintain it. For Mr. Rubio, less time abroad means more time at the side of an impulsive president prone to making critical national security decisions at any moment. As Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Kushner, and Vice President J.D. Vance met with Iranian officials in Pakistan earlier this month, Mr. Rubio was at Mr. Trump's side at an Ultimate Fighting Championship event, noted Emma Ashford, an analyst of U.S. diplomacy in the nonpartisan Stimson Center in Washington. Rubio clearly prefers to stay close to Trump, Ms. Ashford said. Mr. Rubio accepted the National Security Advisor job on an acting basis last May after Mr. Trump reassigned the job's previous occupant, Michael Waltz. But officials say that Mr. Rubio is expected to keep it indefinitely. That arrangement is not inherently bad, Ms. Ashford added, and she noted that previous presidents have entrusted major diplomatic tasks to people other than the Secretary of State. President Joseph Biden Jr. delegated his CIA Director William Burns to handle diplomacy with Russia and ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas, for instance. But she echoed the complaints by many current and former diplomats that Mr. Rubio seems less like someone performing both jobs than a national security advisor who sometimes shows up at the State Department. I do think it's to the detriment of the whole Department of State and to America's ability to conduct diplomacy in general that we effectively have the Secretary of State position sitting vacant, she said. Tommy Piga, a State Department spokesman, contested such claims. Anyone trying to paint Secretary Rubio's close coordination with the White House and other agencies as a negative could be not more than wrong, he said. We now have NSC and State Department that are totally in sync, a goal that has eluded past administrations for decades. Mr. Rubio divides his time between the State Department and the White House, often spending time at both in the same day. In an interview with Politico last June, Mr. Rubio said he visited the State Department almost every day. While there, he often meets with visiting dignitaries before returning to the White House. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Rubio presided over a meeting at the State Department between Lebanese and Israeli officials that set the stage for a ceasefire in Lebanon. His twin jobs really do overlap in many cases, he said. In many cases, you end up being in the same meetings or in the same places. There's just one less person in there, if you think about it. Mr. Rubio added a lot of people would come to Washington, for example, for meetings, and they'd want to meet with the National Security Advisor and meet with the Secretary of State. Now they can do both in one meeting. Asked about his travel schedule during a news conference last December, Mr. Rubio said he had less reason to travel abroad because we have a lot of leaders constantly coming here to visit Mr. Trump at the White House. Mr. Rubio also joins Mr. Trump's foreign trips in his capacity as National Security Advisor. Many national security veterans call the arrangement unwise. saying that both jobs are extremely demanding and incompatible with one another. It was not easy even for Mr. Kissinger, who had firmly established himself over more than 4 years as National Security Advisor before persuading President Richard Nixon to let him take on an additional role as Secretary of State in 1973. And a reversal of Mr. Rubio's approach, Mr. Kissinger was in constant motion, including a round of Middle East shuttle diplomacy that kept him on the road for 33 straight days. In general, it's a mistake to combine those roles, said Matthew Waxman, who held senior roles at the National Security Council, State Department, and the Pentagon during the George W. Bush administration. That said, it's not necessarily a bad thing that a dual-hatted Rubio is so off-screen right now, Mr. Waxman added, especially while so much attention is focused on high-wire diplomacy with Iran. Someone needs to manage foreign policy around the rest of the world. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The next article, 40 years after the Chernobyl meltdown, War Complicates the Hazards, by Andrew Kramer and Evelina Ryabenko. Vines twirl through the broken windows of long-abandoned homes where the detritus of lives interrupted by disaster are still scattered about. Children's shoes, dishes, coats hanging on pegs, all covered in lichen and dust. The ghost towns of Chernobyl exclusion zone in northern Ukraine emptied of people after the catastrophic explosion and meltdown at the nuclear power plant there 40 years ago, on April 26, 1986. High levels of radiation means humans may never live in them again. But these towns served another purpose for Ukrainian soldiers, who recently trained among the ruins. The troops practiced defending the irradiated land against a repeat Russian attack, taking precautions to avoid the most radioactive areas. In February 2022, Moscow's forces entered the zone on the first day of the full-scale invasion and occupied it for 5 weeks. During the exercise, soldiers crouched beside waterlogged, mold-covered walls, aiming their rifles. Others threw live grenades into homes, chipping walls already crumbling from dry rot. Their presence highlighted a reality in the Chernobyl zone. For the foreseeable future, it will be an army-controlled security belt along the border with Belarus, a Russian ally. Everything depends on security in the zone today, said the commander of the battalion training in the area, who asked to be identified by only his nickname Skiff, in keeping with military protocol. Over the years, the radioactive towns, villages, forests, and swamps have posed quandaries for the authorities. The land could never be repopulated, they concluded, because of contamination from long-lingering isotopes, including plutonium. It could bring economic benefits. Ideas included using it as a storage area for other countries' nuclear waste, as a test site for new generations of smaller modular reactors, as territory for solar farms, and as a destination for so-called disaster tourism. Now, everything other than modest solar farm development is on an indefinite hold. Tourists who began showing up at the site 20 years ago are not coming back anytime soon, said Sean Burney. The senior nuclear specialist with Greenpeace Ukraine. Chernobyl has become one disaster layered on another, war-fought and radioactive zone. Russia's invasion in 2022 harmed efforts to contain radiation in multiple ways. Moscow's forces occupied the crippled nuclear power station and used it as a staging area for attacks in Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, early in the war. Their heavy armored vehicles stirred up small amounts of radioactive dust. Weeks later, Russian troops were defeated in the battle for Kiev, and they withdrew from Chernobyl. More worrisome are longer-term war risks. Scientists cannot reach wells that measure groundwater radiation, lest they step on a landmine. Also, owing to mines, firefighters cannot rush to extinguish wildfires that spread radiation and smoke. Foreign scientists who studied radiation in the environment have fled. In February 2025, Russia flew an exploding Iranian-designed Shahad drone into the gigantic steel shell that encloses an older rickety structure built over the ruined reactor shortly after the accident. That older structure, known as the sarcophagus, is at risk of collapsing and releasing radiation. The drone explosion punched a hole in the $2.5 billion outer shell called the New Safe Confinement and started a fire that burned through material needed to maintain the airtight seal. No radiation was released, but the strike set back 2 decades of efforts to safely isolate the worst of Chernobyl's radiation. The attack came a day before the opening of the influential Munich Security Conference in Germany, a warning to Ukraine's Western allies that the war could spread radiation to Europe from Chernobyl or other nuclear sites. It is unclear how the confinement structure can be repaired. To protect workers from radiation, it had been built away from the reactor and later moved on rails into position over it. Now, repair work will have to be done in the highly radioactive zone, possibly by cycling large numbers of workers through stints that cannot exceed 11 hours per year to comply with safety rules. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has estimated that repairs will cost $500 million and last for years. Foreign donors, including France and Britain, have so far pledged 70 million euros, or about $82 million, for urgent repairs. The Russian drone was most likely cost no more than $50,000. Easier to repair was a nearby solar farm that was struck by shrapnel from the drone. The 18 damaged panels were replaced. 2 solar plants are operating in the Chernobyl zone, and a third is under construction despite the war. They sell electricity for the grid using high voltage transmission lines originally built for the reactors, and they provide backup power for cooling ponds for nuclear waste. Solar farms, which are unaffected by radiation and are largely impervious to missile and drone attacks because they are dispersed over large areas, still have a viable future in the exclusion zone, said Yevgen Varyagin, the chief executive of Solar Chernobyl. The company opened the first solar plant there in 2018. Otherwise, the area around Chernobyl is now primarily a military site, fortified against attacks from the north towards Kiev and against possible Russian sabotage of the reactor or waste storage facilities. Tank traps, which look like X's made from steel beams, and coils of razor wires stretch out over fields in the zone. In military positions, paths are covered in nets to protect against drones. These defenses are typical for much of the front line in Ukraine. Other military preparations are peculiar to the radiation zone. To fight in this landscape, the Ukrainian army took special precautions. It did not dig trenches or burrow bunkers into the ground, lest it expose soldiers to radiation in the soil. Instead, above-ground berms or bunkers were built into hills of fresh sand that was trucked in, looking like large yellow ant hills. Those now dot the landscape around the Chernobyl plant. Soldiers patrol the ghost towns where buildings are covered in moss and surrounded by mature trees, lost in a swirl of dense vegetation like ancient Mayan ruins. In the recent exercise, soldiers with the 28th Regiment of the National Guard maneuvered amid abandoned homes with corrugated metal roofs and broken windows. Though devoid of people, the area must be defended against further damage, said Skiff, the commander. Compared with destruction inflicted elsewhere in Ukraine, an attack that released more radiation at Chernobyl, he said, would be on a completely different scale. My next article is Jet Fuel Shortages Linked to War Are Driving Up Costs for Summer Vacationers by Christine Chung. This summer is shaping up to be an expensive and uncertain time to fly, especially if you're planning a European vacation. Volatile fuel prices because of the war in Iran are straining airlines around the globe, but perhaps nowhere as much as in Europe, where jet fuel supplies could run low by mid-May. European airlines like Lufthansa and KLM have announced they are cutting flights and others could follow. Carriers everywhere are increasingly passing costs on to passengers wherever they can by raising airfares, charging more for bags, and tacking on additional charges for fuel. Some are canceling flights. For travelers, the prospect of a reasonably priced summer vacation is growing dimmer by the day. There is a level of uncertainty here that we have not seen since COVID when it comes to travel, says Katie Nastro, a travel expert at Going.com, a membership service for finding cheap flights, adding, "This will be a challenging year for the average traveler hoping to take an affordable summer vacation. It's a total mess. U.S. airfares, both domestic and international, have continued to climb since the war began at the end of February, according to an analysis of economy round-trip tickets by the travel search agent Kayak. On April 13th, an average international trip cost $1,064 compared with $776 on February 23rd, and a domestic U.S. trip cost $358 compared with $335 on February 23rd. Global prices of jet fuel have soared by more than 70% since the start of the war, according to the Platts Jet Fuel Price Index. This situation has U.S. carriers expecting to spend billions extra on fuel this year, and at least one, Spirit Airlines, has already, in bankruptcy, has asked the government for a bailout. Jet fuel is one of the largest operating costs for airlines. Rob Britton, an adjunct professor of crisis management at Georgetown University and a retired American Airlines executive, emphasized that even when the war ends, it will take months for fuel prices and airfares to stabilize. It won't happen overnight, he said. It's a total mess. While domestic airlines noted in earnings reports this month that consumer demand has remained steady, some said they were bracing for it to taper off. Some are scaling back routes through the end of the year and reconsidering plans for next year if jet fuel remains so costly. Andrew Nocella, United's chief commercial officer, said in an earnings call on Wednesday that the airline had raised prices across the board 5 times since the start of the war. He also said United was proactively canceling lower demand flights like red eyes, as well as those on off-peak days like Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, ultimately removing 5% of capacity through the rest of the year. Airlines have levers they can pull, such as consolidating several low-demand flights into fewer, fuller flights, said Mike Arnott, a spokesman for Cirium, an aviation analytics firm. Across U.S. airlines, domestic capacity is down by up to 2% this summer compared with before the war, Cirium data shows. For now, airlines are making small adjustments largely tied to regional flights. Ms. Nastro said, "This means that while international nonstop routes may not be as affected, multi-leg journeys to small cities or flights booked on separate carriers could be riskier for travelers," she added. The outlook for American carriers is rosier than that of American and Asian airlines, which rely far more heavily on oil from the Middle East. Aviation analysts said the United States has significant oil reserves and refining infrastructure. For European airlines, fuel supplies are guaranteed to the middle or end of May, according to a J.P. Morgan report published last week. However, fuel shortages and high prices will likely lead to summer capacity cuts from June onwards, starting with domestic and marginal routes, the report said. The bank's analysis flagged Britain as higher risk relative to other European countries because of its reliance on Middle Eastern oil imports. Europe is going to be like this leading indicator. Any of these issues are going to sort of hit the U.S. traveler. We're going to see these roll out in Europe first, said Christopher Anderson, a professor of services management at Cornell University. If this persists, air travel is going to get way more expensive and with way less flexibility to get there. In recent days, European and Asian airlines have made notable flight reductions. The German airline Lufthansa announced it would remove 20,000 flights over the next 6 months in a bid to conserve jet fuel. The Dutch carrier KLM said it would axe 160 flights from destinations it serves with multiple daily flights such as London and Dusseldorf, Germany. North Atlantic Airways, a low-cost Norwegian carrier, canceled its flights to Los Angeles. Hong Kong-based Cathay Pacific is eliminating 2% of its flights from early May through the end of June, a move that the airline called a last resort. Experts advise that travelers planning to fly this summer and fall book now, if they haven't already, stressing that nobody knows how long the fuel shortage will last and how much worse the pressures on airlines could become. At some point, the cost of the trip, including the price of fuel, will exceed the revenue that can be earned, said Mr. Arnott, the Cirium spokesman. The next article, James sues to reclaim U.S. funds for roads, by Samantha Latson. The New York Attorney General Letitia James on Friday sued to block the Trump administration's cancellation of more than $73 million in highway funding for the state. The lawsuit, which Ms. James filed in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, asks the court to overturn the U.S. Department of Transportation's decision and to restore the funding. The Department of Transportation said this month that it would withhold financial support because New York refused to revoke commercial driver's licenses it said were issued illegally. Ms. James said the trucking licenses were in compliance with state and federal regulations and only issued to people with legal status. New Yorkers depend on safe, reliable roads and bridges to get to work, take their kids to school, and keep our economy moving, she said. The administration cannot promise funding to our state and then abruptly yank it away. The department also said it would withhold $147 million in funding in the future. The aid funds roads, maintenance, safety improvements, and infrastructure. Ms. James said the aid blocked could interfere with critical projects, increase costs, and hamper economies throughout the state. The trucking licenses have been part of a protracted battle between New York and the department. Sean Duffy, the transportation secretary, said in June 2025 that the federal government would audit state licensing practices because millions of people entered the United States illegally, leaving the truck licensing system vulnerable to exploitation. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration audit released in December found that 107 of New Yorkers' commercial driver licenses were issued illegally out of 200 sampled records. The agency said the state issued commercial licenses to foreign drivers without providing evidence that it had verified the driver's legal status. When more than half of licenses reviewed were issued illegally, it isn't just a mistake, it is a dereliction of duty by state leadership, Mr. Duffy said in a statement. Governor Hochul must immediately revoke those illegally issued licenses. Governor Kathy Hochul said in a statement on Friday that the department's claims were false and that the blocking of federal funds was political payback. The Attorney General's office said the state reviewed the cases the department cited and found that the drivers had legal status. According to Ms. James, the department has pressured New York to revoke certain lawfully issued commercial driver's licenses held by immigrants. She argued that revoking the licenses would disrupt crucial industries that rely on commercial drivers and could exacerbate the bus driver shortage. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. My next article is 31 Sloths Died from Cold at Warehouse in Florida by Neil Vigdor. 31 sloths that had been acquired by a planned animal attraction in Orlando, Florida, featuring the peculiar creatures, died soon after they were imported into the United States, many of them from a lack of heat at a warehouse that was not authorized to keep wildlife, state and county officials said. The deaths occurred between December 2024 and February 2025, but only recently came to light in a new report by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, which found several violations when it inspected the warehouse in August. The report was obtained earlier by Inside Climate News, an environmental journalism nonprofit. The findings have drawn intense criticism to the not yet open attraction in Orlando, which is called Sloth World and describes itself on its website as rainforest-inspired indoor habitat where more than 40 sloths live on their own terms and the world's only slotharium. Sloth World's president, Benjamin Augusta, did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Mr. Augusta told Fox 35 Orlando on Friday that Sloth World had abandoned its plans to open and would file for bankruptcy. All of its remaining sloths were under the full control of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, he said. Also on Friday, the Central Florida Zoo and Botanical Gardens in Sanford, Florida, said it had recently accepted a donation of 13 two-toed sloths that were being quarantined for at least 30 days. The zoo said it was working with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums on the long-term placement of the sloths with various accredited organizations. Many of these animals will require lifelong assistance from humans to give the opportunity to thrive. All of them have been in human care since arriving in the country, the zoo said. Sloth World was to be a part of growing and loosely regulated tourism enterprise centered on sloths, the slow-moving, cuddly-looking mammals native to Central and South America. Of the 6 species of sloths, one is considered critically endangered and another is vulnerable, according to the International Fund for Animal Welfare. The sloths that died had been imported by Guyana and Peru, 2 countries that experts said still allow sloths, which cannot regulate their body temperature and usually feed on tropical leaves, to be captured in the wild to be sold elsewhere. When the first 21 sloths arrived at a warehouse a half a mile from Sloth World in December 2024, the building did not have electricity or water. One of the operators of the warehouse told the state wildlife officer. The warehouse, which was registered with the state under the name Sanctuary World Imports, served as the receiving center for Sloth World. It was not ready to receive the sloths, but it was too late to cancel the shipment. The operator, who was identified in the report as Peter Bondre, was quoted as telling the officer, "Several space heaters that had been purchased to keep the warehouse warm stopped working after they tripped the circuit breaker in a nearby building where some extension cords had been plugged in," the report said. The 21 sloths died due to what Mr. Bondre called a cold stun. R.K. Brown, the officer, wrote in the report, "By the time an additional 10 sloths from Peru arrived at the warehouse in February 2025, 2 had not survived the journey, and the rest appeared emaciated and died from what the report described as poor health issues." Building construction and inspection officials with Orange County issued a stop work order on Thursday for the warehouse, which they said was never authorized for animal storage. A spokeswoman for the county said in an email on Friday that building inspectors had been unable to gain access to the building, which was last approved for storage vehicles in 2021. State permits are required to own a sloth as a pet and separately for displaying them commercially. Sloth World, which listed Mr. Bondre as its vice president on its website, and the Sanctuary World Imports did not immediately respond to several requests for comment. Mr. Bondre did not respond to requests for comment. Mr. Agresta was identified in the officer's report as Mr. Bondre's business partner. Earlier on Friday, the website for Sloth World said it would open in about 25 days, with tickets advertised as starting at $49 per person. Representative Maxwell Alejandro Frost, a Democrat of Florida, whose district includes Orlando, said on social media on Thursday that he was appalled to hear about the sloths' deaths. These sloths, naturally solitary animals, were put in the worst conditions possible, Mr. Frost wrote on X. They were taken from their natural habitats to a packed warehouse that wasn't properly heated and allowed for the spread of deadly viruses, leading to a stress-induced death. Dr. Rebecca Cliff, the founder and executive director of the Sloth Conservation Foundation, a nonprofit conservation organization based in Costa Rica, said she began contacting the operators of Sloth World earlier this year after receiving reports from current and former employees that more than 24 sloths had died in its care. That's when the alarm bells really began ringing, Dr. Cliff said in an interview on Thursday. Dr. Cliff said that the operators of Sloth World did not answer questions about the conditions of dozens of other sloths that it had acquired for the exhibit. When she had asked which conservation group Sloth World was donating some of its proceeds to, as it's pledged to do on its website, Dr. Cliff said the operators did not say. Florida is one of several states that allow sloths to be owned as pets or displayed for commercial purposes. The State Wildlife Commission did not immediately answer questions on Friday about the status of Sloth World or say it was investigating the sloth's deaths. Many countries have restrictions on the exportation of sloths, including Costa Rica, but not Guyana or Peru, said Dr. Cliff, and noted that sloths can live at least 50 years in the wild. Buying one as a pet can cost as much as $10,000, she said. The trauma of the capture and the transport is actually really significant because sloths are really sensitive to stress, she said. They don't have a fight or flight response. They can't run away or defend themselves. My next article, Texas camp where 27 died might not be relicensed, by J. David Goodman and Ruth Graham. Camp Mystic, where 27 children and counselors died in catastrophic flooding last year, may be denied a license to reopen this summer after state health officials deemed the camp out of compliance with Texas health and safety requirements. A review by the Texas Department of State Health Services, obtained by the New York Times, said the camp's emergency plans must undergo major revisions in order to receive a license to reopen. A spokesman for Camp Mystic said the camp received the notice on Thursday. The camp planned to partially reopen to campers in late May for its 100th summer, not on the site where campers died last summer, but rather on a nearby site. The document addressed to the camp's director lists more than 20 categories in which Mystics' submitted plans have been judged incomplete, insufficient, or missing, according to the state's guidelines. Texas enacted a package of strict new summer camp safety laws last fall in the wake of flooding last July that killed 27 children and young counselors, as well as the camp's executive director. A spokeswoman for the state health department, Laura Anton, said that the letter was a regular part of the process of reviewing a camp's application for a license from the state. Most youth camps have received a notice of deficiency letter from their emergency plan, she added, because of the additional safety requirements adopted last year. In a statement, the camp said that it was working with the state agency to address the areas outlined. Our priority remains the safety and well-being of our campers, and we hope to continue the nearly century-long mission and ministry of Camp Mystic, the statement said. A spokesman for Camp Mystic said it remains the camp's intention to reopen on May 30th for the first session as planned. Problems identified by the letter to the camp include maps that do not make clear where cabins are located in relation to floodplains and floodways. The review also notes the camp's insufficient plans for emergencies, including fires, severe injuries, flash floods, and other natural disasters. In the section on flash flooding, the review notes that the camp did not submit a flood plan map from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Its evacuation plan is also labeled insufficient because it lacks, among other things, details on staff responsibilities during an evacuation, a notification process for families, and a process for evacuating campgrounds and notifying authorities. The Texas legislature will hold 2 days of hearings next week on what happened at Camp Mystic last summer. A group of legislators visited the camp's grounds this week as part of the state's investigation. The state police are also investigating the camp's response. More than 800 girls have signed up to attend Camp Mystic this summer. The camp's leaders said in February the camp planned a modified schedule of 6 shorter sessions to accommodate more children, since the section of the campus that sustained serious damage and where people died remains closed. The body of one girl, Sile Stewart, has not been found. Her parents are among many of the families whose daughters died at the camp, who are now suing the Eastland family, the camp's longtime owners, for negligence in their preparations and response to the floods. An emotional testimony this month, Edward Eastland, the director of the site where campers and counselors died, said that he did not see storm warnings the day before the flood, and he had not met with workers at the camp to discuss the possibility of flooding. The next article, imagine a great playoff debut. This rookie's was probably better, by Matthew Fairburn. The Buffalo Sabres were trailing the Boston Bruins by 1-0 in the second period on Thursday when Noah Ostlund grabbed the puck in the neutral zone. He skated through the spoked B at center ice of TD Garden and flew into the offensive zone with speed. He pivoted to make Bruins defenseman Andrew Peeke think he was going to pass before racing into the corner. Josh Doan was crashing the net and he had the Bruins' attention, but Ostlund, as he typically does, saw something else. He held on to the puck a split second longer and saw Sabres defenseman Bowen Byram creeping up toward the face-off dot. Somehow, Ostlund feathered a pass through the narrowest of lanes, and Byram hammered the puck past Bruins goalie Jeremy Swayman to tie the game. Honestly, he kind of surprised me a bit there, Byram said. I wasn't sure he was going to get it through me. Unreal pass by him. Sitting in his locker after the game, the third in the team's first-round playoff series, Ostlund shrugged it off as a routine play. I saw him all the way, and then Donor did a good job driving the net so that the lane opened up, he said. Ostlund, 22, was playing in his first Stanley Cup playoff game. He had missed the final few weeks of the regular season in the first 2 playoff games with an injury. With the series tied 1-1 coming to Boston Sabres, coach Lindy Ruff put Ostlund into the lineup in place of the injured Josh Norris. On the A-line was Zach Benson and Doan. He's been a guy that I can rely on in all situations, Ruff said before the game. That turned out to be true throughout the Sabres' 3-1 win that gave them a 2-1 series lead ahead of Sunday's Game 4. After Ostlund set up the tying goal, Alex Touche scored just over 4 minutes in the third period on a perfect wrist shot. With just over a minute left and the Bruins net empty, Ruff trusted Ostlund, a rookie, to go over to the boards and help protect the lead. Victor Arvidsson, who has been a thorn in Buffalo's side all series, was carrying the puck through the neutral zone. Jason Zucker bumped him off, and Jack Quinn won a battle to get the loose puck and clear it down the ice. It would have been called icing, but Uslan managed to fight off Pavel Zacha and then beat David Pasternak to the loose puck. He spun around and put the puck through Pasternak's legs to give the Sabres an insurance goal. The effort to get down there, the effort to outbattle, and then the scouting report on Pasternak when he's in goal is "You've got to go 5-hole," Ruff said with a smirk. The Sabres were starting to feel desperate for offense midway through the game. The Bruins have not offered the freewheeling Sabres much time and space in the series. And Swayman has been a difference maker in net. Outside of the Sabre-spirited third-period comeback in Game 1 and a few late garbage-time goals in Game 2, Boston's disciplined defense has put Buffalo's offense in a clamp. Uslan helped change that. He is only 5'11" and 180 pounds, but is crafty and slippery player with the puck on his stick. Multiple times in the first period, Uslan managed to slip into the offensive zone and help the Sabres establish zone time. As the Sabres captain Rasmus Dahlin pointed out before the game, Uslan never seems to make a bad decision with or without the puck. This is part of why the Sabres had 90% of the expected goals when Uslan, Benson, and Doan were on the ice at 5-on-5. The Sabres did not allow a single scoring chance with that line on the ice. I mean, yeah, jumping right in, he hasn't played a game in a couple weeks. First ever playoff hockey game in his rookie year, and the guy gets one-on-one? That's special, Tuch said, referring to Uslan's 1 goal and 1 assist in the game. I mean, the hockey IQ's off the charts. But honestly, the compete, he went in there every single shift, made a difference every single shift, and he was phenomenal. Uslan is human, though. He was feeling the nerves you might expect a rookie to feel in his first playoff game. But he has been quick to point out that he played playoff games in the American Hockey League and when he played professionally in Sweden. He loves big games and wants the puck on his stick. Even so, his heart rate was spiking early in the game. Maybe a little bit in the first couple shifts, Uslan said with a smile, but it goes away pretty quick too. Back in December, Ruff was not happy that the Sabres sent Uslan to Rochester. He rejoined the team a few days later, scored goals in his first 2 games back in the lineup, and has not had to make that drive down the thruway once again since. When the Sabres took Uslan at number 16 in the 2022 NHL draft, his profile was that of a playmaking center with a reliable defensive game. He knew he was drafted, that he would need to more seasons in Sweden before he was ready to come to North America. He had a plan and stayed true to that plan. He needed to add strength to handle the competitiveness of the program in North America. Then he played 1 year in the AHL, and by the end of it, he was drawing the toughest matchups as the Rochester Americans' #1 center. So maybe it should not have been a surprise that he was ready to jump into the NHL and make an impact the way he has this season. He has always had the skill, but the way he's consistently winning puck battles is what is separating him. When Dahlin was asked before the game if, because of his size, people don't realize how good Uslan is in the area of the game, Dahlin shook his head. They should know by now, Dahlin said. If the Bruins did not, they found out on Thursday. For a first playoff game with us, he gets A+, Ruff said. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 26, 2026 issue of the front section of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Aaron. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times opinion page. Following that at 3 o'clock, the New York Times Arts and Leisure, and at 4 o'clock, a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Radio Reading mails out a large print program schedule to our listeners every other month. If you have not received a Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service large print program schedule in the mail, please call us at 716-821-5555. We will make sure that you receive one every other month. A Braille version of the schedule is also available upon request. Our number again is 716-821-5555. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hi, this is Dick Shanley, and for the next hour I will be reading from Sunday, April 26th issue of the New York Times Opinion section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. This article was written by Maureen Dowd. Trump, Iran's newest hostage.
The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability